On April 30th, 1789, at Federal Hall in New York City, George Washington was sworn into office as the first President of the United States and the only president in history to have been elected unanimously. To his contemporaries, Washington was the natural choice to serve as our nation's first president. By the mid-1770s, he had, in effect, become a symbol of independence and the emerging new nation. He gained international fame through his unswerving determination as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army and by serving as President of the Constitutional Convention, which established a new instrument of government for the United States. He took leadership of a young nation, experimenting with a new and untried form of government. To many, success or failure of this experiment depended on the first president. Aware of the expectations of his countrymen and the world, Washington carefully guided the United States through the early, turbulent years of nationhood. Over the course of his presidency, Washington worked to establish his vision of a politically strong, economically independent nation that was respected in the eyes of the world. His guiding charter was the Constitution, and he worked to establish the efficacy and authority of the document throughout his administration. Washington invoked constitutional precedent in three major instances: the Neutrality Proclamation in 1793, the Whiskey Rebellion in 1794, and the Jay Treaty in 1794. In addition to international and internal threats to the nation's stability, he was tasked with lowering national debt, establishing a viable banking system, appointing the Supreme Court, establishing treaties with Indians that would open the West for American expansion, and a myriad of other challenges. Shortly after assuming office, Washington wrote to historian Catherine Macaulay Graham that he walked on untrod ground. He was acutely aware that his actions and decisions as the nation's first president would set precedent for those who followed. Consider the challenges he faced. The United States had just fought a long war to escape the tyranny of monarchy. Washington had to ensure that every aspect of the president's policies and lifestyle conformed to the ideals of Republican government. Strange as it may seem to modern Americans, matters of presidential etiquette created much controversy in the new government. The explosive power of arguments concerning Washington's social life grew out of the fact that there was nothing concrete nor established that the American people could visualize when thinking of their nation, except for George Washington, and, through him, the office of president. No detail was too mundane when considering how the president would appear in the eyes of Americans and the world. Washington's first presidential term focused largely on organizing the executive branch of the new government and establishing administrative procedures that made it possible for the government to operate with the energy and efficiency he believed were essential to the future of the new republic. With the failures of the Articles of Confederation fresh in his mind, Washington believed that the federal government, as the embodiment of all of the people and states in union, should be supreme. In order to maintain and reinforce this distinction, he was careful not to subordinate himself to state officials. Many historians agree that Washington's brilliance lay in his ability to listen to opinions, often very diverse, and set a course of action. One of his most important presidential precedents was establishing a cabinet of trusted advisors. He deliberately selected experienced men who offered diverse points of view, believing they would provide the perspective he needed to make strong decisions. As his first term drew to a close, Washington became increasingly concerned over the growing partisanship within the government. Although he despised political partisanship, he could do little to slow the development of political parties. One of his primary goals as president was to develop a national character free of sectional differences. He thought it important to help unite the new nation by visiting every state. Hoping to bring the far-flung citizens of America face to face with their new federal government, he traveled to the northern states in 1789 and visited each of the southern states in 1791. The only state he did not visit was Rhode Island, which had not yet ratified the Constitution. His tours convinced him that the new government enjoyed the general support of the American people. Convinced that the government could get along without him, Washington made plans to step down at the end of his first term. His cabinet, however, convinced him that his presence was essential to ensure that the government remained on a steady course. Once again, he was unanimously elected as president. His second term was dominated by foreign affairs and by increasing partisanship within his own administration. He took office on the eve of the French Revolution and the outbreak of a general European war. He strongly believed that the United States must remain neutral in order to safeguard commerce and the nation's finances. He firmly held that the future of the nation depended on the increase in wealth and the opportunity that would come with commerce and westward expansion. While many Americans favored supporting France, Washington did not believe that the United States had the resources to win another war against Great Britain, the greatest military power in the world. Despite bitter opposition to the Neutrality Proclamation at the time, one of Washington's greatest accomplishments was keeping the United States free of war, giving the nation a chance to grow in strength while establishing the principle of neutrality that would shape American foreign policy for more than a century. By 1796, Washington was ready for retirement, and no one could persuade him to accept a third term as president. 8 years earlier, in his inaugural address, Washington had stated that he was unpracticed in the duties of civil administration, but he proved to be one of the most able administrators ever to serve as president. He exemplified fairness and integrity in his appointments and decisions, assuring Americans that the president could exercise broad executive authority without corruption, and he executed the laws with restraint, establishing precedents for broad-ranging presidential authority. Washington set a standard for presidential integrity rarely met by his successors, though he established an ideal by which they are all judged.